Spirit of God in the clear running water, blowing to greatness the trees on the hill. Blow, blow, blow till I hear the breath of the Spirit blowing in me.
Welcome. You're watching Spirit of Life. Norm Currie is my name, your host for today. We're going to be following the love dialogue pathway of seeing love emerge in our daily life. Today we're speaking with Norman Rose. He's an Anglican member of the Volunteers of God branch of the Focolare Movement. Norman's also a retired psychiatrist, so we go into some fairly interesting places. Norman, thanks for coming in, and as this retired psychiatrist, you spent some of your time writing this book. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, this was just published a month or two ago by Austin Macaulay, and it's my life story.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I've called it Life's Golden Thread, really because of the ideas of Chiara Lubick, and we'll talk more about Chiara. She founded the Focolare Movement, and she was really the key to who I am. I would not be who I am and where I am now without her. So there is a quote to one of her books, the introduction to one of her books. We too, once we put our lives on course with God's will, often discover that golden thread, as Chiara calls it, that the presence of God's providential love that runs through the events of our lives and gives new meaning to our past, present and future, bringing healing and wellness and salvation. So what I'm going to be talking about is that golden thread that God has put in me.
Yep.
And how that's run through my life.
That'd be fascinating. And you've mentioned something about one of the start of that is you having two rebirths or two births. What was that about?
Well, I had in some ways a difficult early life, early childhood, adolescence, first marriage, right up to the time that I was in my early 40s. And the root cause of that was what psychologists and psychiatrists call an insecure attachment to my mother. Now, my mother had a very difficult early life. She was brought up in the Ukraine, which during her lifetime became the Soviet Union.
Yes, yes.
And she was one of 14 children to her mother.
Yep.
She also had 3 half-siblings, older half-siblings, to her father. Her father's first wife had died, married my grandmother when she was 16. There were so many children that the children were farmed out to the older brothers and sisters. And my mother was farmed out to her sister Yella at the age of 8, and she never saw her parents again.
Good heavens.
At the age of 11, both of her parents died within a short while of each other. My mother never went to the funeral.
Right.
She was bullied by her brother-in-law, who was with her sister-in-law. Yella was supposed to be looking after her. So I believe that she had fundamental problems in love herself. It's interesting because I knew Yella and her husband Abram when I was a boy. Abram died when I was about 12 years of age, and I cannot remember any affection between them and my mother.
No.
I cannot remember any affection of my mother towards me. And the other thing was that I was never what she wanted me to be. She wanted a girl.
Yes.
And, you know, when my second brother was born, and I remember this quite clearly because I was there and my father answered the telephone about the birth of my brother, and he cried because it was another boy.
Oh, right. Yes.
So I was never what they wanted. And as a consequence of that, I had a very insecure attachment. That meant that I was very unsure about my identity, not only as a male, but as a human being.
Yeah.
And I never had a satisfactory sense of worthiness. And I guess that was reflected in my relationships with my peers.
Yeah.
And it had a profound effect on my relationships with young women when I was old enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
That effect was that I had no problem with friendships with women, but as soon as it became romantic or there was anything possibly about marriage or whatever, I would panic. And if you look at the literature on insecure attachment, I think I followed one of those patterns where if I was close to somebody and there was a possibility of an enduring relationship, it was either being swallowed up or being abandoned and lonely.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was in I gave up a number of relationships, fled them. And later I was, when I got insight into this and understood it, I became quite remorseful.
And we're remorseful in the fact we're out of time. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Spirit of Life. We're speaking to Norman Rose, who's a member of the Volunteers of God and a retired psychiatrist. Norman, before we went to that break, you were in the process of developing what happened in your first phase of...
I went into a first marriage, and that was marred by the fact that both of us, I think, were too immature.
Yeah.
In the book, I refer to a cartoon in which two people, young people, are gazing each other over a cocktail glass, each holding, looking into each other's eyes, and there's a conversation balloon there, and in that conversation balloon it says, "My, what a delightfully damaged person." So I think we were both damaged, and as a result of that, we had all sorts of problems. And eventually I realised just how pathological our marriage was.
Yes, yeah.
And I think by that stage, she's probably had enough of our marriage too. And I had to leave it. And it was only then, after a very, very difficult time, that I came to... I had a number of psychotherapists, by the way, and neither of them really understood what was the nub of my problem, which was that insecure attachment to my mother and how it had affected me.
Way back,
And then I was introduced to some of the works about attachment, attachment theory. And I began to understand, this is me.
Yes.
This is really me. And I have to do something about it.
Yes. Yep.
And that was like a light bulb turning on. I knew. And I'd had a number of relationships as a single person in between marriages and all sorts of problems there. And it was only when I met my present wife and she accepted me exactly as I am. We both dated other people for quite a while. We didn't make a commitment. And it was, I think, because of that, that I began to trust her.
Yes.
And I began to trust the possibility of a relationship that was very different to what I'd had before. And as a consequence of that, I grew emotionally. I began to accept that the way I had grown up in my family, the way I had seen myself as being unloved or not loved sufficiently, the values that I'd had in my family, which I think my parents were too close to one another. My father never had any really independent thoughts or almost independent existence.
Right.
And for me, gradually learning that for me it was important to stand on my own feet and to love somebody else who could also stand on her own feet, and we meet as separate individuals. And that's what happened. And that was like a second birth and I developed a strong sense of self and strong belief in myself, if you like, as a consequence. So that was my first rebirth. The second one was I was brought up in a Jewish family. I sang in a synagogue choir. My family were fairly secular in their Jewishness, but being Jewish was very important to my identity. I was part of a Labour Zionist youth group, and so it was because of that my first wife was Jewish, and some of my partners in between marriages were Jewish
as well.
And I began to think that, this is a bit too exclusive. This is a bit too exclusive, but some other things happen. A friend of mine was singing in the Royal Melbourne Philharmonic Choir. And when I told her that I'd sung in synagogue choirs, she said, come along and come along to practice and see if you want to sing with us. Now, I did, and the rehearsals were held in the chapter house of St Paul's Cathedral in Melbourne. Now, my parents were absolutely paranoid about Christianity. And they had, and it was only much later that I discovered what the skeleton in the family closet was. And the skeleton in the family closet was that my father's only brother and my paternal grandmother had both converted from Judaism to Christianity before the Second World War. And this was never spoken about by the family.
That was a secret.
So when I first went into up the stairs, up to the chapter house, I was almost in a state of dread, like I'm going into the camp of the enemy. So I went there, And they accepted me into the choir, and I sang there for quite a number of years. Now, what did we sing? Handel's Messiah. St. Paul by Mendelssohn.
Yes, yes.
And that's how I got to know what was forbidden to me, which was knowledge of Christianity.
Right. Let's take a break. That is a most beautiful example of the power of music. That's wonderful. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching The Spirit of Life, and we're speaking today with Norman Rose, who's a member of the Volunteers of God and a retired psychiatrist. You were in the part of the story of Mendelssohn, and you're up the stairs.
Yeah.
So what happened there?
Anyway, then I met Anne, my second wife.
Right.
And I've already talked about what happened in our relationship. It was a very slow burn, if you like.
Yeah, yeah.
And we eventually married. We married in the multi-faith chapel of the Monash University in Melbourne.
Oh, okay, yep. Mm-hmm.
And she wanted an Anglican priest to give a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
He did, and this and the singing of a few hymns, which didn't even mention Jesus, offended my parents, but that's another story. Now, when we married, we agreed that that she could continue her life as a practicing Anglican.
Yeah.
And I wasn't. My faith was my business.
Mm-hmm.
So I was under no obligation. I was free. She said, I'll occasionally come to church, and I did, and I remember being reluctant to kneel.
Yes, yes, yes.
It was all very foreign to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 1982, beginning of 1982, she said to me, I'm going to a meeting, I'd like you to come along, but you mightn't be the same afterwards.
Right.
Now, I'd already met members of the Focolare Movement through her at social occasions, and I was aware even then, that the whole mission of the Focolare Movement was about love. It was about God is love, and love, to love each other as I have loved you.
Yeah.
And I knew that.
Mm.
And I also knew that for me, love had been such a difficult proposition.
Yeah.
So I went to that meeting with her. Chiara Lubick, the foundress of the Focolare Movement, was speaking, and she was speaking in Italian through an interpreter.
Right.
What she said was, when you love like Jesus,
Yep.
you create that Jesus in the other person. That Jesus who is also able to love.
Yeah.
Now that was what a number of my friends call my St. Paul movement.
Yeah.
My St. Paul moment.
Yeah, that's right. Get knocked off
Because
your horse.
it was an instant conversion.
That's right. Yeah.
Instant.
Really? Yeah. So you walked in one way and walked out differently.
Yeah, this is my road to Damascus.
Yeah.
So after that, I couldn't get enough of it. I could not get enough of it. And I went to meetings of the Focolare Movement, regular meetings. One of the senior people there took me under his wing. I took instruction in the Anglican Church.
Yep.
And about a year after I had met Chiara, I was confirmed, baptised and confirmed. Confirmed as an Anglican.
Yeah, as an Anglican.
And I've been a practising Anglican ever since.
And it obviously continued attachment with the Focolare movement as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's pretty big, what actually happened to you through that conversion.
But interestingly, it was a complete surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way I could have predicted that this would happen to me.
No. But
And see, this is part of the golden thread.
Yes, that's right. Yep. And you don't realise how much of a fertile soil you are until someone puts the appropriate seed in it, and that was the example of that. That's quite amazing. So, the Focolare movement, what happened with that? Well, which one of those two would you like to explore? The Anglican side first, or the Focolare? They're both stories.
They're both stories. Yeah. The Anglican side is fairly. I started in the Anglican Church, and when my wife and I moved to the area where we're now living, we started attending an Anglican church there. And, you know, the Focolare movement had always taught us to love each other, make ourselves one with each other, to stand in their shoes. And we had a new priest at this new church where I'm still attending. And suddenly at the altar, he collapsed. He was taken to hospital and found to have a brain tumour. I knew that my mission was to love him.
Right.
I knew that.
Yep.
And during the year following that, before he died, he would call me, and even in the middle of the night, and I would go to him. "I'm not going mad, am I?" he asked.
Oh, yes, because of the brain tumour.
Because of the brain tumour.
Yeah.
So I visited him a number of times to care for him.
Yep.
Because as a volunteer of God, that's my mission in life.
We're running out of time. So this mission in life of yours is fascinating. So we could examine this next week if you're able to come. Would you come in again?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Norman. You've been watching Spirit of Life, and we will be back next week, and we'll be speaking with Norman Rose. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.